I remember when I was a king. 40 feet in the air. Okay, fine. Maybe 20. It was me, Jack, and Henry, my neighbors. 3 planks of cedar wood wedged between branches made up our castle. Our kingdom was full of riches, ample pine cones, rusted nails, and an ice cold 6-pack of Coca-Cola. Where were our parents? Who knows? But for that 2-hour window, we ruled a kingdom. As I got older, my days became filled. School, sports, camps, playdates. Every hour had a plan. At 9 years old, I was an all-star QB in the Yorkville Flag Football League, a league comprised of the most athletic little Jewish boys on the Upper East Side. I was constantly busy, happy, but busy. Whatever pockets of space did exist, the walk home from school, a break between activities, a nice, long poop. Those moments were mine. At the age of 11, this changed, though. It changed because at 11, I got my first iPhone, and suddenly, free space was a relic of the past. This was my 4th ever Instagram post. The caption, #swag. #yo-yo. #swag. #yo-yo. Suddenly, every moment became an excuse to be looking down. Anytime boredom arose, I reached for my phone. I became constantly irritated, anxious, alone. My story, it's probably one you've already heard before, right? Kid gets iPhone, becomes anxious, depressed, lonely. This was the story that I believed. But what if the truth was actually a lot more complicated? At 15, COVID hit. School shut down, and suddenly I had nothing. No school, no sports, no honors chemistry. Thanks, big guy. All I had was time. Lacrosse season was soon approaching, and I had a vision. 2-week training camp. I was ready to dominate the preppy white boys this season. To limit my distractions and help me focus, I decided I was going to delete my social media and meditate every day. This was a personal project, a social experiment, just 2 weeks. No big deal. Every day I trained, I hiked, and I meditated. It was amazing. For the first time since I was a kid in that treehouse, hours in the day belonged to me. I felt more peaceful, independent, confident, like a king again. I had solved my mental health issues. Boom! Mic drop. Millie rock. Enlightenment achieved. And like any good religious prophet, I needed to share my awakening with everyone. At 17, my friend Kay and I led our first social media detox. We convinced all of our friends to delete their socials for 2 weeks, mainly by bribing them with Chipotle. We had group meals, gratitude journaling, daily meditations. Every day you'd see a group of high schoolers clustered in the library, sitting together in silence. It was radical. Afterwards, my friends came up to me. They say, "Ben, I don't miss my phone. I love being offline. I was thrilled. Social media is the problem. Detoxing is the cure." Kaboom! All my friends' mental health solved. Dr. Phil, he ain't got nothing on me. So what's next? Well, by 20, I was speaking at schools about the harms of social media, leading detoxes with an amazing org called NoSo, and producing a documentary on this issue. At this time, more than 30 US states had introduced phone bans into the classroom, and parents across the country were waking up to this issue. Yet, just as everything was falling into place, my core beliefs began to falter. It started with an experiment I did for the documentary. Inspired by Morgan Spurlock's Supersize Me, I decided I was going to go back on social media. For an entire month, I was going to scroll for 5 hours every single day. I scrolled in the morning. I scrolled when I brushed my teeth. I scrolled in class. This is me scrolling at 12,000 feet above elevation because I was not about to let frostbite get in between me and my precious reels. I went into this experiment thinking that I'd either get clinically depressed or go brain dead. But the crazy part was, it wasn't that bad. When I was 14, social media was an escape from a deep sense of loneliness in my life. But when I was 20, I didn't need to escape from anything. I was hanging out with friends, going snowboarding, dancing at parties. Sure, social media was still a distraction, but it wasn't a crutch. And somehow that made the difference. After my experiment, I started to read about the results of all those phone bans getting into place. And yes, teachers love it. Focus improves. They're good. But in terms of addressing the mental health crisis, early research suggests there is no correlation between introducing a phone ban and decreasing anxiety or depression. So what's going on? Well, it all clicked for me this past fall. I was speaking at a school about the harms of social media, and after my talk, Jack, the 10th grader, he came up to me. He said, "Ben, I loved your talk. I agree with you, phones suck, but I can't delete my socials." He said, "I can't delete because I've already tried. I end up spending a week offline, and then the cravings, they're just too much. Ben, I don't have a car. I don't live near my friends. There is literally nothing for me to do except be on my phone." Here I was, standing in front of a 10th grader who grew up 2,000 miles away from New York, and yet somehow, he looked just like me. In this moment, I realized something. We don't just have a crisis of screens. We have a crisis that when I look up from my screen, I have nowhere to go. We have a crisis of lost social fabric, of diminished community, of non-existent neighborhoods. America, we have a crisis of space. And I always used to think that phones were the culprit, that, they created that crisis. But the more that I looked, the less that proved true. I used to think phones destroyed communal spaces, parks, churches, neighborhoods. But that's not accurate. From the 60s to the 90s, a younger generation, more detached from World War II, was less civically engaged. Suburbanization spread communities apart. TV watching rose dramatically. All of this combined to strip us of civic life. PTA participation dropped by half. Fraternal clubs shrank dramatically. Bowling leagues, yes, bowling leagues, they dropped 40% in participation, even as the number of bowlers went up. So more people were bowling, but they were bowling alone. Next, let's look at free play. You might imagine that kids stopped playing outside when that damn iPad came out. But that's not true. This actually happened in the 70s and 80s. There was a massive kidnapping scare, and parents were terrified that their kids would get snatched off the street. This, combined with educational pressures and a shrinking family size, created a new normal where exploration was a risk. Don't go outside. Stranger danger. If you see a white van, it's definitely some creepy guy trying to give you free candy. So, we talking Skittles? Once we took away free play, we took away exploration, we took away community. That's when a mental health crisis truly began. You know, you might have seen a graph like this, showcasing suicide spiking for young people after 2010, when social media got popular. But you want to see something crazy? If we zoom out and start looking at the year 1950, we see a dramatically different story. Here we can see that the suicide epidemic didn't begin when an iPhone came out, but nearly 60 years earlier. In fact, from 1950 to 2005, suicide for people under the age of 15 quadrupled. So yes, screens are 100% a part of this mental health crisis, but they did not create that crisis. In many ways, they filled a void that was already empty. And so if we don't refill that void, rebuild that community, that free play that had already disappeared, then our mental health crisis will still be here, even if the phones aren't. Okay, so what do we do about this? Well, I'll be honest. I am not an MD. I am not a PhD. Look at my facial hair. I've barely finished puberty. But I do have some ideas. I think this entire conversation has been framed around taking away the screen. Me, I'm concerned less with what we're taking away and more on what we're giving back. For young kids, let's give back free play. The freedom for unstructured, unmonitored exploration where you can invent worlds, climb trees, and rule your kingdom. For older kids, let's give back space. You know, the US spends billions of dollars every year treating teenage anxiety and depression. What if instead of treating symptoms and prescribing antidepressants, what if we invested in the root cause of all these issues? What if we invested in third spaces, in community spaces, with the understanding that taking away a screen works, but only if you give something back? The perfect example of this is camp. Every summer, 14 million kids leave home. They sleep in cabins, eat god-awful food, hang out with friends all day, and they don't miss their Snapchat streaks. That's what giving something back looks like. You know, thinking about my first detox initiative, something finally makes sense. Our project didn't work because we convinced a bunch of high schoolers to delete social media. It worked because we created a space where we could be offline together, where we felt like we were a part of something, a space inside of ourselves so that way we could sit with our emotions instead of needing to escape from them. You know, sometimes I think about my neighbors, Jack, Henry, George, sitting atop that treehouse. The Doherty family ended up moving away, and I didn't see them much throughout high school, but sometimes I think about what could have been. What would childhood have looked like growing up connected in a community? Us, a band of boys prowling the streets of New York, staying out too late, making bad decisions, exploring abandoned alleyways, blowing shit up. Approaching girls, getting rejected, finding love, protecting each other, running and laughing and fighting and screaming and crying and not looking down. Because we didn't need to. Because the space that we needed was all around us. The space that we craved was all around us. Space was inside of us. Thank you.